reasonable. Why doesn't Agent Smith just lurk in Twitch chat? That's potentially something that could be added in the future, but it just saves him some energy and he can focus more on the information that he's dispensing as opposed to sifting through the Twitch chat and find the questions that are good or not good. Because let's be honest, there's a lot of stuff you have to sift through in Twitch chats. Now, I'm not saying any names, but those of you, you know who you are. Okay. Welcome, Just Jordan. Okay. Let's do it. Let's do it. What's up, dude?
Hello?
Welcome. Hey, Agent Smith.
Hey, how have you been?
Oh, you know, hanging in there. It was a couple weeks off because the internet was all messed up, but I'm back now and things seem stable for the most part.
Oh, good. Glad things got worked out.
Yeah. Your mic is kind of...
Oh, yeah, sorry. Is that better?
Yep. It was fixed.
Yeah, the fan.
Okay, so in the past couple weeks, since it's been more than 1 week, more stuff has happened. Some stuff that I've kind of been aware of. I know there was some investigation stuff with the FBI or something in the US. What was that about?
Yeah, that's, well, I'll start by saying that I'm a bit tired, so I might not be up to my usual standard tonight, but I'm gonna try anyway. But if I sound a little zonked, that's why. I've been up since 4 a.m.
It's all good.
So, yeah, that's the Mueller investigation regarding Russian interference into the 2016 election.
Hmm.
And supposedly they announced that they were ready for indictments. And apparently they have enough evidence that they're going to start kind of bringing in people for arresting people. But they haven't announced who they would be going after. They haven't even given any details as far as who they're actually going to arrest or any developments there. They've just announced that that stage has been reached in the investigation. So there's not a lot to talk about there yet. It's just sort of a signal that the investigation is reaching a mature stage.
So we're StarCraft players. We know about Blizzard, and they love to give announcements of announcements. This isn't the announcement of what's happened, but it's the announcement that something is about to happen. And we're not going to tell you what it is, but it's going to happen.
Yeah, I got to build that hype.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know enough about, criminology and the nature of how the FBI runs their investigations to kind of give a deep read on that. So, yeah, I don't know if that's just standard operating procedure to do that, or if it's part of some larger strategy to put pressure on people and see what they do.
Mm-hmm.
I can't comment on it really, but there's probably some reason for it. I just don't know.
Yeah. The other big thing that stands out is the Spain-Catalan situation. That seemed pretty amusing.
Yeah, it's entertaining if nothing else. I still don't think it's going to go anywhere. I mean, the Catalan independence political leadership doesn't really seem to have a plan other than just to kind of arbitrarily do things, take symbolic actions that don't have a lot of substance to them. And they actually declared independence, I think, whenever it was, like a week ago or 2 weeks ago. And then they didn't really have anything to follow that up with. Then the Spanish government just said, oh, okay, well, we're going to dissolve the regional government, and we're going to impose direct control. We're going to have new local elections. We're going to take direct control of the regional police force, and we're going to take control of the Catalan public broadcaster. And then the independence forces, which really that should have been like the expected counter move from the government. And their response was basically to say, well, you shouldn't do that. And then they just sort of asked their supporters to kind of not accept it.
Mm-hmm.
So I have no idea what they're planning to do, and I doubt that they even know what they're going to do. The European Union isn't going to come in on a white horse and save them. The European Union has been trying really hard not to have an opinion on it, and they finally came out with one, which is to say that they just want the status quo. And status quo is always a nice, safe bet as far as international politics goes. So the European Union is studiously saying that things should not change. But they're not going to do anything to impose that because it's the EU and they don't have a lot of power to do anything. So they're mostly just standing by. So there's no help there, and there's no other countries around the world are that interested. You know, if you're something like a country like Russia or China has issues with separatism in their own countries, they're generally not real gung-ho about propping up separatists in other countries unless it's a country on their border that they're having issues with. But other than that narrow circumstance, they generally don't do it a whole lot. So the Catalan independence forces are pretty isolated, and the deck is not stacked in their favor. The government pretty much has all the cards. And you know, we've talked about this before. They don't have a critical mass of support even in Catalan that would be necessary to really push hard for independence, like legitimately. You know, the government has enough supporters in Catalan itself, you know, pro-Spanish Catalans, that it can kind of take a harder line and get away with it. So that's not going to go. That's basically one big horse and pony show. You know, the Catalan independence political movement, those parties are just kind of trying to kind of stress the system, kind of make as much noise as possible to try to kind of delegitimize the government. But given that they don't have enough support to really leverage that into a stronger movement, that it would actually have a chance to get independence at some point, or at least get some concessions from Madrid. I mean, without that, it's just politicians kind of riding the tiger, so to speak. So, yeah, humorous if nothing else. I mean, it's something to watch. It's a circus, basically.
Yeah.
I thought a more substantive independence movement was the Kurds, who made kind of a halting semi-attempt at independence. They had the independence referendum, but they said during and after the referendum that, well, we won't use this as a reason to declare independence. We just want to make clear what the people want so that we can use that in negotiations. You know, the finesse of that argument was rather lost on the surrounding countries that have large Kurdish minorities, and in Turkey's case, an on-running Kurdish guerrilla war, so they were not nearly so excited about that referendum, and they've been putting a lot of pressure on the Kurdish regional government in Iraq to denounce it, basically, to kind of renounce the result. That's been Baghdad's position. The Iraqi government's position has been to try to coerce them into completely disowning the referendum result. And there's been some fighting. Basically, there's kind of a contested city called Kirkuk, and historically it's been Kurdish, and I hope I'm remembering this right, but historically it's been a Kurdish city, but Saddam Hussein settled Arab families there to try to Arabize the city. And so it's sort of an area of contention. The Kurds still claim it because they think it's historically theirs, but a good chunk of the population, maybe a majority, I don't recall, is ethnically Arab. So for a long time it was just kind of assumed to be in the government camp, because I think it was in a government Kirkuk province. It was not in the Kurdish regional government territory. But then the Islamic State blew through and took all of that, or threatened it anyway. And so the Peshmerga, which is sort of the Kurdish militia forces, they moved into Kirkuk. They took the opportunity presented by the vacuum from the Iraqi army retreating to kind of move in there and occupy it. They did so, of course, for the safety of the residents, to protect them from the Islamic State. At least that's the excuse they gave, but I'm sure in the back of their heads was the thought that they might be able to keep it long term if they played their cards right. They have not played their cards right, so that's probably not going to happen. The Iraqi military kind of moved in around Kirkuk and then actually basically invaded the city. There were negotiations beforehand, so there wasn't really any fighting for the city. The Peshmerga forces just sort of retreated in front of them. So that's been a scenario that's been repeated in a lot of different areas, because Kirkuk was not the only part of Iraq that the Kurds occupied after the Iraqi army retreated in the face of the Islamic State. So a lot of those areas the Peshmerga are also retreating from. So it's kind of basically a return to the status quo ante from before the Islamic State, as far as who controls what territory.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of Kurds.
Real fast. You're saying Kirkuk. Where is that?
That's northern Iraq. I think it's on the Euphrates, Tigris River, maybe the Eastern River. That should be up north. Be maybe east of Mosul, I think, southeast.
Southeast. Boom. The map.
But they've pulled back largely from a lot of the territory they took, and they kind of retreated to the Kurdish regional government.
Oh, there
It's
we go.
not-
Kirkuk. Found it.
There you go. Yeah,
Sorry.
that's been the source of some contention as far as negotiations between Baghdad and the Kurdish regional government, as far as the future of the Kurdish regional government in Iraq.
Mm-hmm.
Among other things, oil revenue is the other big one. Most of Iraq's oil is in Kurdistan, or Iraqi Kurdistan rather, and then south, in the far south, around Basra and sort of the Gulf area. So the Iraqi government thinks it should have that oil, and then they'll, of course, redistribute that to the Kurds. Kurds don't particularly trust them to do that, though, so that's kind of become a sticking point in negotiations between the two.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not clear if the Iraqi government will put more pressure on the Kurds in order to try to make sure they don't declare independence or push too hard for autonomy. Baghdad has the support of Iran and Turkey as far as putting pressure on the Kurds in this regard, because those two countries also have issues with their Kurdish minorities. So that's a wait and see situation. That's kind of a thing story. There was some fighting in a city in the tri-border area between Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. There's an oil pipeline that goes from Iraqi Kurdistan into Turkey. And apparently some Iraqi military forces, have been trying to take that city from the Kurds. And the thing is, that's actually in the Kurdish regional government's territory proper. Mm-hmm. That's not something outside that the Peshmerga had advanced into. And so they actually are fighting them there. I haven't heard much of that story for the past couple days since I first read about it, so I don't know how that's developed. But that has the potential to spread. That could proliferate into a wider conflict there. The United States isn't particularly pleased by that conflict between the two, but because of course the United States wants to focus on the Islamic State. That's sort of been the American preference, but the Islamic State is collapsing. They're sort of on their last legs.
Yeah, I saw a bunch of posts recently about a bunch of soldiers and stuff surrendering themselves to various forces. I think I saw they were trying to surrender to the Kurds because they had a better chance of kind of integrating and not being straight up killed, whereas the Iraqi forces, I think, were just killing everything as they were going through.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that, but it wouldn't surprise me. Technically they're fighting the Kurdish. When people talk about Kurds fighting the Islamic State, they're generally talking about the Syrian Democratic Forces, which is sort of this coalition that the United States helped build in eastern Syria. Mostly it's Kurds. But the United States went out of their way to try to create an Arab militia. It incorporates Arabs and Turkmen and Christians and Yazidis and whoever else the IS has kind of shit on here in eastern Syria. And the idea is that the SDF is meant to be kind of a broad umbrella organization that has more legitimacy than what a purely Kurdish organization would have if they were pushing into those territories that IS holds. And yeah, the SDF is kind of designed to be more conciliatory, to put more focus on reconciliation, because they do want to maintain some legitimacy in the areas they take. In contrast, over in Iraq, a lot of the forces they're fighting are like popular mobilization units, as they're called, which is sort of a fancy euphemism for Shia militias. And the reputation of Shia militias in Iraq is not very good. Most of their reputation was defined by people's experiences in the 2006 to roughly 2008 civil war, as it effectively was, in which Shia militias were just as violent, really, as the Sunni rebel groups and Islamist groups that were running around at the time, blowing up Americans as well as political rivals in Iraq. So they tend to be rather violent, and it wouldn't surprise me if they were exacting some revenge in areas that they quote-unquote liberated.
Yeah.
And then, of course, over in Syria, there's the Syrian government, which is not known for its humanitarian impulses. So it wouldn't surprise me if they also were taking a rather hard line as far as surrendering IS people. Yeah, that conflict is reaching its end game, at least as far as the Islamic State goes, but that's creating new problems because there was already a conflict in progress before Islamic State even got there. And so rather than the collapse of the IS representing a potential for peace, it's rather representing a return to the status quo. Now that we've finished fighting IS, we can go back to fighting what we were fighting over before they got here. So that's more likely, the more likely outcome, sort of return to the Syrian civil war proper. And that's putting stress on the Kurds, because the Kurds are on a lot of people's shit lists in the Middle East, especially Turkey. So it's not clear if the civil war will resume as a sort of government versus anti-government type civil war, or if it'll turn into a sort of anti-Kurdish operation. There's some sign of that. I had something in my notes about Turkey moving into Idlib province. Idlib province is sort of the northwestern province in Syria, and it's sort of the beating heart of the rebellion there. It's mostly held by rebel groups, and most of that area and those rebel groups are tied relatively strongly to Turkey. Oh, here we go. Yeah, so a couple weeks ago, the Turkish military had been massing around Idlib on the Turkish side of the border, and they had also announced an offensive by rebel groups in Idlib province, not targeting the Syrian government, mind you, but rather targeting other rebel groups. The idea being basically that they would shore up their control. The dominant rebel groups wanted to shore up their control and to marginalize other groups that were not part of their broad coalition. And the Turkish government also made some vague references to protecting civilians in Idlib province. But really, it's probably the Turks kind of solidifying their de facto sphere of influence there. Before they'd kind of been willing to tolerate other rebel groups running around, but now that the conflict is kind of reaching a stage where it might well become a frozen conflict, they want to make sure they have more control there. So it could just be solidifying power in the region, in that area, specific area. There was also an agreement made with Russia, apparently, to create de-escalation zones. And the idea there was to try to make it possible to enforce ceasefires. Before, a lot of rebel groups would not respond well to announcements by, larger rebel groups or by foreign powers that there would be a quote-unquote ceasefire in Syria, and they would not respect it, and that made it kind of hard to continue peace talks. And so a de-escalation zone that's actually enforced by Turkish allied rebel groups, if not the Turkish military itself. I think they actually did roll across the border. That'll make it easier to sustain these ceasefires and facilitate further peace talks. And then also, they probably want to put pressure on the Kurds in Idlib province to make sure they don't get too uppity. The Turkish government is a lot more concerned about this point at the rise of Kurdish militia, specifically the YPG, in Syria. They're getting very autonomous and very independent, and they don't want them to get any ideas. So by having a presence there in Idlib, they kind of have a ready force that can be deployed against Kurds if necessary, against YPG-occupied territory. Yeah, I think we talked a few weeks ago about how Erdogan and Putin were sort of having negotiations, and that it wasn't really clear why. So this might be what they were talking about. This could be sort of the fruit of those negotiations, and understanding that Turkey would sort of have de facto control over Idlib province, and that would be kind of their sphere of influence. It would be nice if it all led to a general peace agreement, or at least a broader ceasefire, but that's pretty unlikely. And it might well be that people in Idlib province get a little tired of being tossed around by Turkey, so there could be problems even there. Most likely, status quo is the safe bet. Probably just more civil war for a few more years.
People all about stability, and if that means maintaining a conflict in a stable state, I guess that's what people want.
Mm. Yeah, stability is the kind of thing that you don't really miss until you need it.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of take it for granted here in the United States, where I live. Stability is, well, perhaps less so over the past few years, but stability has been a bedrock of American prosperity. It's not the U.S. military or the U.S. economy that really makes the United States a superpower. It's really the political system. The stability that the political system provides makes it possible to have a really strong, prosperous economy. And the economy, in turn, makes it possible to have a rather large military. So that's, the bedrock of American power and success has been its political system. So stability is very important in that regard as far as engendering prosperity and whatever it was I was just thinking about. Again, very tired. The words escape me.
Get back your words.
Ugh. So we had a few questions. What are your opinions on North Korea? China had historically defended the national integrity of Korea, mostly against the Japanese. Should China and the U.S. team up to pursue nuclear non-proliferation, or should we take the neoliberal approach of democratic liberation through increased economic interaction with North Korea, and thus increasing the national integrity and standard of living there? Definitely not that second thing. And it's not even because the reason that approach, basically that's the approach that the United States took with China. Let's just trade with them and integrate them into the world system, and then capitalism and free market forces will innately lend themselves to the liberalization of the society, not only economically but politically. That was the argument for letting China into the World Trade Organization in 1999, as well as just accepting them more generally into the world community. That wouldn't work with North Korea because the North Koreans wouldn't agree to it. North Korean government is not at all interested in exposing the North Korean people to the outside world. So trade links are kind of out of the question as far as that goes. They might be willing to do something more limited. They do have some kind of weird arrangement with South Korea, or at least they had one for a while, in which they had this factory town they set up in the DMZ. I can't remember what it was called, but basically the factories were owned and run by South Koreans, but the workers in them were actually North Korean. And they had that for a while, but it was very limited in scope, and it was very tightly controlled by the North Koreans. There were a lot of rules there as far as who could work there and who could they interact with, etc. So I doubt a liberal economic regime is in the cards for North Korea. So teaming up, so to speak, with China on non-proliferation of the two options presented would probably be the preferable one. And I'm sure it's the one that the Chinese would. The trouble the Chinese have is that there's a limit to how much they are willing to pressure North Korea. I mean, they don't want the North Korean government to collapse. That would be a problem for them, not only in terms of large numbers of refugees coming across the border, and at this point in history, it shouldn't be a stretch to imagine why a large number of refugees might be a problem for a host country.
Yep.
They don't want to have to deal with all that baggage. But then there's also the strategic consideration. You know, the expected outcome if the North Korean government collapses is reunification with South Korea, and that would put an American ally right on the Chinese border over there in Manchuria. So strategic considerations mean put a limit on the amount of pressure that the Chinese government wants to put on them. That doesn't mean they want them to have nuclear weapons. They don't. You know, as crazy as the North Korean government doesn't have any better reputation in Beijing than it has in Washington. It's just that Beijing tolerates them more for strategic considerations. It's not as though China has an abundance of allies in the world. If you don't think that's true, just talk to anybody from China. You know, I've talked to people from China, and they complain that, you know, if you're an American, you can get visa-free travel to just about anywhere on the planet, whereas if you're Chinese, you really don't have that luxury. It's a pain in the ass trying to get permission to get to where you want to go.
We actually have a StarCraft player named Pili Pili whose passport is of Kazakhstan, and he's had tons of trouble traveling around, where players from most of the other esport countries don't really have an issue. So that, like you're saying, kind of speaks to the abundance or lack of allies for the country and the mobility of its citizens around the world.
Yeah, you know, the United States has the legacy of the Cold War status as a hegemonic power and the leading economy in the world. So even if a country isn't an ally of the United States, there's generally special consideration given to visa arrangements. Countries are more willing to have visa arrangements with the United States to facilitate travel, you know, at the very least for business, if not broader sort of touristy type travel. But if you're China, you don't really have that legacy, and, you know, neighboring countries get paranoid. You know, not only are countries around China paranoid about its intentions, even more so going forward now. That's something else we can talk about, that plenum finally ended. But beyond just strategic paranoia on the part of China's neighbors, there's also kind of a long-running prejudice against ethnic Chinese in a number of Southeast Asian countries. You know, a lot of Chinese merchants traveled to those places and became very wealthy, and they became sort of disproportionately powerful in a lot of those societies, and that kind of engendered some discrimination, some discriminatory feeling on the part of the local populations. Sometimes that explodes in violence. That's what happened in the 50s. There was a big Red Scare in the 50s after the communists won the Civil War in China in 1949. And that, in conjunction with broader Cold War concerns, facilitated kind of a, maybe not quite pogroms, but a fair amount of violence against Chinese in a number of Southeast Asian countries, you know, Thailand, Indonesia. Indonesia famously in the 60s, after the what was supposedly a failed coup by communists in 1965, I think, in Indonesia, sparked a massive crackdown. You know, that was basically the onset of military rule under what's his name? Well, I don't know his name. I can't remember it. Juharto, maybe. But anyway, that crackdown, besides seeing immense violence against communists and people suspected of being communist, a few Chinese were also targeted in the subsequent violence, which was not just government violence, but broad-based. It was sort of public, communities turning on each other. Very ugly period in Indonesian history that they don't even like talking about now. So, if you're China, you need all the friends you can get. You kind of want to improve there. And alienating North Korea, as much as North Korea may not be a choice location for most Chinese to travel and work in, they still want to maintain that relationship. North Korea is a useful diplomatic tool, if nothing else, a strategic asset generally. The only problem is the nukes. They don't particularly trust Pyongyang with a nuclear weapon, so they probably will work with the United States on non-proliferation. But it probably won't be as much as the United States, certainly not the Trump administration in particular, would want. Yeah, we've talked a little bit about this before, I think. It's just the most likely outcome is just more cooperation between China and the United States that escalates the more intransigent North Korea becomes on the issue.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not as though China isn't trying. I think it's the case that they're really going out of their way to protect North Korea. They're just not advancing as quickly as the United States wants. That's an important distinction there.
Yeah. I think that's kind of
see.
how they want their country to be, where they're kind of in a stable state of size and everything, and they're constantly in the news.
Yeah, North Korea. Yeah, they want that attention. Well, and most of your military equipment is vintage Cold War era Soviet leftovers. Not even the good stuff, just the stuff that the Soviets were willing to export. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's attention is probably your more powerful, potent weapon at that point. You can always throw around the odd death threat. Get you somewhere anyway. Worked for a long time. The United States had some kind of program set up with the UN where, in exchange for the North Koreans shutting down the nuclear program, they would get food aid. And so sometimes they wouldn't get enough food aid or as much as they wanted, so then they would start up the program again and they would make it a big dramatic thing. They'd call in the media and say, all right, we're starting it up again. And then so, of course, the United States and the international community would come and they would negotiate, and it turns out, oh wait, they're willing to shut it down if we just give them more food. So there was a problem, there was a moral hazard there, which is that, okay, well, what's to stop them from just continually threatening us to just get whatever they want? They can just demand food, technology, whatever. So finally, that program was basically just shut down because of that moral hazard issue. And the North Koreans have been just muling ever since. So let's see, the next one was, a few weeks ago I asked about the blockchain being used for voting in liquid democracies. You said you didn't know much about it, but I gave you reading. Did you have a chance to get to it? Yeah, I got to some of it. I'm still trying to wrap my head around the specifics. My concern, given what I've read thus far, is fraud. Because it's not so much changing, hacking it, so to speak. It's disrupting it. Because if I'm understanding it right, because I need to read more about it to make sure I do, but you couldn't really, it would be very difficult to go in and change people's votes, to go in and break the chain. Well, not break the chain, but to go into the chain and change all of the nodes, which you would have to do if you wanted to just change votes and try to induce a desired outcome in an election. But what if you don't want to induce a certain outcome? What if you just want to break it? What if you just want to break the nodes or fiddle with them such that it's clear they've been fiddled with? That could create a lot of doubt in the election results in and of itself. Or you could just lose votes. You could just make it such that some of those points in the chain would not be acceptable because they'd been tampered with. If you could just fuck with it enough, basically, you could create enough doubt that the overall election result could be called into question. Yeah, this is kind of the criticism I had of the quantum communication technology the Chinese have been working on. There's been some stories in the news about the Chinese government and some of their researchers have been working on a unhackable quantum method of communication. I'm not doing it justice. I'm pig ignorant on such things, but the idea was that even just by trying to hack into it, you would make it impossible to read. So you could never decrypt it, basically. So anything you sent through that mode would be safe. But the trouble is, if just by trying to read it, trying to decrypt it, trying to hack it, that you make it impossible to read, well, all anybody has to do to prevent you from even using it is just continuously try to read it. Now, that's my understanding, and again, very limited understanding of that issue. I would be interested in, if anybody knows better, to put some feedback in chat, because I'll read that later. But yeah, I mean, if you're the United States, say, and you're in a conflict with China, and if they're issuing commands through this quantum technology, all you would have to do is continually try to decrypt it, or just observe it, and that would make it unreadable for anybody. So then they wouldn't be able to use it. So you wouldn't be decrypting it, you would be getting it in information, but you would be denying them usage of the communications mode, such that they would have to defer to something else that you probably could hack. And again, I apologize if I'm just completely ignorant and not getting this right. Hopefully somebody in chat can kind of respond to that who knows better. But yeah, it's sort of something similar there with the blockchain democracy. You don't have to go in and hack it, you can just disrupt it, so to speak. And that could be enough in and of itself to create problems, even if you're not changing the outcome of the election per se. Or maybe you even do. Maybe you could just remove enough votes from the chain that you can influence the outcome that way. Again, I need to read a lot more. I've only read some of it. But that's kind of my impression thus far. Those are my early impressions, so to speak. Not a great answer, but again, that's where I'm at right now. Let's see. And then somebody asked if I thought Russia interfered with the election at all. Probably. The Russian intelligence agencies and the Russian government are, they don't mind interfering. That's not hard to do. The real question isn't did they interfere with our election. It's almost certain that they did, because that's just standard. It's just, what really the broader question, and we talked about this I think the last time we did this, was the broader question is, was it impactful? Did it matter that they interfered with our? Did it actually change outcomes in any significant way? And I don't know that it did. I don't know that you can really influence an American election, given how strong democratic institutions are in the United States, just by, having mean tweets, basically, putting out all of these stories. I don't know how much fake news, so to speak, really influences people. That's a whole nother discussion we could have. But yeah, I think the bigger question is, was it impactful interference? And I don't know that it was. I don't think it was, but that's an opinion, and my opinion doesn't carry much weight, unfortunately. But yeah, that's my perspective. The evidence there, what evidence there is kind of limited, so it's very hard to tell whether it was impactful. And again, if somebody in chat knows better, has some evidence to that effect, by all means, post it.
Well, legally speaking, if there was collaboration, it's bad whether it was impactful or not.
Well, I think whether or not there was... sorry?
What people consider is whether or not any interaction with Russia changed the outcome of the election, which you're saying probably not. Maybe it made a greater than zero impact, but was it the grain of rice that tipped the scale? Probably not. We talk a lot about norms changing over time, and how we've had two kind of election cycles where Obama wins, so we have Democratic leadership, and there are a lot of people who feel disenfranchised, and he had a big kind of set of people who wanted to vote for what they perceived to be an outsider candidate, and Russian intervention wouldn't really change that flow of how the United States has been developing over the past 8 years.
Yeah, that's it in a nutshell. That really hits the nail on the head. Sorry, blanking out a little bit. I'll try not to fall asleep in my chair.
Okay.
What were we talking about?
So we did the Russian interference in the election. You basically
Right.
covered that, though. It was
Yeah.
a broad question, and the Mueller stuff was the related
Yes.
question earlier on that is the current
Okay.
iteration of us trying to find the news about it and who broke the rules, who talked to whom, and all that kind of thing. But that was basically it.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So the United States, the developments in the United States over the past, 80 years, or 10 years, however long you want to put it, that's an endogenous process. There might have been some minimal outside influence there, but it's mostly within the United States. It's mostly domestic politics. There's nothing Russia could have done to make Hillary Clinton a, uncharismatic candidate. That was all sort of her. And the broader trends that kind of pushed people to Trump, who would not normally vote for someone like that, that's also been in the cards for a while. So a lot of these are just long-running trends that all just came together in a certain way to produce an outcome where the United States is run by a reality television host. That's not Russian conspiracy. That's just history, and that's just American society working out its problems. Not particularly gracefully, but at least they're still using the democratic machinery. No, I was going to go somewhere with that, but I don't remember what it was.
Meander here, meander there. It's all cool stuff, so we don't really care.
Can you shed some... Wait, what was it? Oh, no, well, alright. Can you shed some light on what's going on between Iraq and the US right now? Yeah, we just talked a little bit about that, basically. I mean, what I said before is pretty much the answer to this question. Again, the United States is mostly just kind of trying to mediate, trying to make sure that Iraq and the Kurds, or at least try to pressure the Iraqis and the Kurds not to go to war with each other, not to start a larger conflict with each other while there's still a conflict going on in Syria with the Islamic State. It may not particularly matter what the United States wants. The United States does not have doesn't have a lot of leverage, because the United States kind of pulled out from the Middle East to a degree under the Obama administration. And the idea was, let's not keep dumping resources into this, furnace of a region. Let's just sort of delegate. Let's have regional allies take more responsibility for maintaining stability in the region. And that worked in so much as it meant the United States didn't have to do as much. But the downside is that it means the United States doesn't have as much leverage to induce certain outcomes or to pressure countries to behave a certain way. If you're going to delegate, you can't really complain too much when the person you delegate to starts doing their own thing. That's the whole point of delegating. You want them to take more responsibility. If they don't do what you want, well, you probably should have thought of that before you started delegating. Or you should have had your delegation be conditional, or you should have done something. The United States didn't do that. But the United States government has been accused quite a bit over the past 10 years of not having any strategy. There's been a lot of sort of short-term strategies, some notions, some ideas of what the United States should be doing in the world, but no grand strategy, no grand overarching idea of what the United States should be building towards. And that's a very valid criticism. The United States has kind of been aimless since the Cold War ended and doesn't really have any particular purpose. And that makes it very difficult to kind of pick things out and label them as important enough to justify large investments of resources, large investments of diplomatic capital, that kind of thing. And so that, combined with the Obama era sort of retreat, or at least nominal retreat, it wasn't a complete retreat by any stretch, but that sort of delegation, let's call it that, those factors all combined mean that the United States doesn't really have the leverage to force Saudi Arabia or Iraq or whoever to treat the Kurds in a certain way. And so conflict between the Kurds and the Iraqi government may be inevitable on that count. And I don't think the United States is going to come in on a white horse and rescue the Kurds if they do come under attack in that way from Baghdad or Turkey or whomever. That would just be, we've talked about this a number of times, but it would just be too hard diplomatically. The United States has to maintain good relations with Turkey, with Iraq, with Iran. Well, maybe not with Iran, but certainly with Turkey and Iraq. Those are major regional powers, and I don't think the United States is in any position to sacrifice its relations with them in order to try to prop up another dependent state in the Middle East that needs U.S. protection in order to survive. The United States already did that with Israel, and it's just been a running sore in American relations in the region ever since. I don't think the United States government really wants to replicate the experience with a prospective independent Kurdish state. So, off the top of my very tired head, that's what I can think of there. Any thoughts on the crypto ruble and other potential national cryptocurrencies? We get cryptocurrencies every week, cryptocurrency questions every week, and every week we do, I learn something new about cryptocurrencies, because generally the questions ask me something that I have no idea even existed. So I've never heard of crypto rubles before, and I haven't heard anything about a prospective shift to national cryptocurrencies. So I don't have anything to say about that, but thank you, whoever asked that, for bringing that to my attention. That's something I can look into. Sounds interesting too. So I'll have to skip that, unfortunately. Question: will the rising relative productivity of China, India, others undermine the status of the petrodollar, leading to an exodus from that system, and what would be the effects if this came to pass? It's been a while since we've had a petrodollar question.
Yeah.
That was one of the first ones we had way back in the day. But we started doing this in July? Is that when it was?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. So, petrodollar, actually, that might be one of the podcast episodes I do if I ever get that off the ground. Because I actually, in response to that July petrodollar question, I did some research, so I actually have some stuff there. Basically, the petrodollar is not really like the mainstay of the American economic power. There's sort of this theory, for anyone who isn't familiar with it, that the US dollar gets most of its value from the fact that oil is traded mostly in dollars. And so then the idea is that because the dollar gets most of its value from that, the US economy benefits from it, and that if the petrodollar were to collapse, if oil were not traded in dollars, the value of the dollar would collapse and the US economy would take a severe hit. Not really true, for the simple fact that most of the US economy is powerful innately, endogenously. The economy does not depend on the dollar having some value, and dollar probably would not collapse if oil were to stop being traded in dollars. It would probably decrease in value somewhat, but trading oil in any given currency is not going to just completely blow up that currency and make it super valuable. It would be more valuable than it was before, but it's not going to suddenly make that economy of that currency global power. So in that sense, where was it? So even if that did happen, even if rising productivity in China, India, others did undermine the status of the petrodollar, I don't think it would lead to any significant outcome there. And then there's also the fact that productivity in India is not really rising. That was another thing I was reading about recently. India's economy is not doing too hot right now, and hasn't been for a couple of years, kind of stagnating. That owes to a lack of reform. Everybody was really excited about economy when Modi was elected, because Modi was supposed to be a big reformer, but he hasn't been able to kind of square that circle. You know, Indian politics is very complex. I mean, there's a billion people there, more than a billion people in India, so politics innately complex when you're dealing with that many people. You know, trying to negotiate what kind of pizza to order amongst a small group of friends is difficult enough. You can imagine how much harder it is with a billion plus people. So he was not able to kind of navigate the politics as necessary to pass big reforms, and as a result, a lot of the politics on his part and the part of the BJP, the political party he's in, and it's basically his party at this point. A lot of their politics are shifting more to social conservatism in order to try to shore up their their what's called voter banks in India, to shore up their constituents and their popularity. There was something I was reading about that too recently. Yeah, in my notes here. So reasons Modi is not as popular now. Urban young voters disenchanted. No surprise. Younger people in cities tend to be relatively liberal, and Modi is definitely not that. So no shock there that he's losing support amongst that group. There was some bad policy rollouts. They tried the demonetization thing, where they tried to eliminate small currency notes. That hit a lot of small businessmen and small traders really hard, and that disrupted the sort of gray economy, so to speak, in India. Oh yeah, and there was the big tax reform, which was not a bad idea, but the way they rolled it out, they wanted to unify the Indian market by having what's it called? Value-added tax. They wanted to implement a national value-added tax, and then they wanted all of the states to also pass value-added taxes simultaneously. And that replaced the old tax system in which each state and the national government all had different tax systems, which was very confusing for traders, and it acted as a barrier to trade between regions in India. So the idea was, let's remove this barrier to trade by implementing a single tax system that's the same all over India. And good idea in principle, but it's been disruptive because, again, a lot of gray economy producers, a lot of traders, etc., not that familiar with the value-added tax. You know, they're not familiar with the administration necessary to do that. So that's been alienating people. The state banks are shit because they're all very corrupt and politically motivated. It'd probably be better off just getting rid of them, but because they have so many non-performing loans, they haven't been lending, and that's hurting as well. So those are all reasons that Modi is kind of on the decline, and that sort of ties into the why the economy is struggling. But anyway, that's a couple points removed from the original question. Yeah, in general, the developing world has improving productivity, but I don't think that's going to undermine the petrodollar at all. You know, and really, you know, the U.S. dollar is already kind of giving ground to other currencies as far as reserve currencies. You know, most major financial institutions do not hold their money, so to speak, solely in dollars. They generally have like 60% in dollars and 30% in euros, or, you know, whatever the hell, and maybe throw in some renminbi, some Swiss francs, some Japanese yen, and all the other big currencies that you would normally have. And rather than the U.S. dollar, it's not a binary thing where the U.S. dollar is the world's reserve currency or is not. It's just a redistribution. Relatively less of portfolios will be held in dollars and more will be held in other currencies. And probably there won't be one dominant currency like what the dollar was in the 1970s. You know, it'll probably just be a basket of currencies going forward.
Diversify that portfolio.
Very good financial advice. Definitely do that. Do you think smaller countries in the Pacific can play some sort of role in cooling off the North Korea versus U.S. mess right now? You mentioned China uses it as a diplomatic tool. Can other countries get involved and help much? No, not really. Yeah, it's mostly a U.S. North Korea thing. You know, the North Koreans are somewhat perturbed by the Trump administration, and the Trump administration, along with the rest of the world, is somewhat perturbed by the fact that a old school Stalinist dictatorship could have nuclear weapons. Nobody knows quite what they would do with them, so everybody's pretty uncomfortable with that. Really, most of the world, including small countries in the region, is behind the non-proliferation effort to prevent North Korea from getting nuclear weapons. But I don't think there's anything they could do beyond that diplomatic support, to really play a big role. Yeah, so short answer, no. There's not really much they could add, because North Korea really wants the nuclear weapons. The government there wants the nuclear weapons, rather, and it would be they would be very useful for the regime there as far as preserving, in terms of preserving itself. And we've talked before about that, about how it's an excellent deterrent, not only because the North Koreans could threaten to retaliate against a prospective invasion using nuclear weapons, but also because if they were defeated, even if the North Korean government were defeated in a war, you would be concerned about what would happen to the nuclear weapons. They could end up on the black market. You know, the designs for them could get spread around, so then everybody and their mother would know how to build them. So there would just be problems even if you could defeat the North Korean government. So the North Korean government could then threaten you with its own destruction if it had nuclear weapons. So very good deterrent for a small, poor country like North Korea, and therefore very attractive. And if you're, again, a Stalinist dictatorship and you don't have to particularly care about what your people think about what you're doing, there's no amount of pressure that you can put on them that would coerce them, because however bad living conditions get in North Korea, the government could just crack down. That's basically what happened in the 90s when there was a big famine. They lost a lot of aid from the Soviet Union after the Soviet Union collapsed, and that, in conjunction with, I think, weather or whatever it was, caused a huge famine, and that didn't overthrow the government. And the government just cracked down. They held on by the skin of their teeth, so to speak. And they did whatever they had to do, and whatever it was they did worked. So that they can always just do that again if things get tough again. So there's not much small countries can do to alleviate that. That kind of intransigence, that kind of stubbornness on the part of Pyongyang. I don't think small countries can bring much to the table to alleviate that, unfortunately, but it were otherwise. Let's see. From what little I know about recent U.S. history, it seems like we are constantly interfering with other elections across the world. Actually, yeah, I think that's what I would... Even going so far as to place people into power ourselves, whether it's effective or not. So why is it such a huge deal that Russia affected our election when we have done the same thing in numerous times? Yeah, I think this is the point I was trying to think of earlier and forgot. Yeah, the United States has interfered in other elections. The question, though, is how do you define interference? So yes, the United States during the Cold War, and I'm guessing this person is probably thinking mostly of the Cold War examples where the United States, or specifically the CIA, would have a role in overthrowing this, that, or the other government and installing, a junta or a shah, as the case may be. In those cases, yeah, the United States was, well, I guess, all right, to be fair, those examples are not technically interfering in elections. That's more interfering in politics, broadly speaking. As far as interfering in elections, not so much. Generally the United States doesn't have to. The big example I can think of off the top of my head was Italy in the early 1950s, maybe late 40s. There was a real question about whether the communists would win this election after World War II. And Italy, mind you, was not in great shape. It got tore up pretty good in the war. Not as bad as certain other places, but bad enough that a lot of people were destitute and were struggling to survive. And there was a famous quote, I think it might have been from Dean Acheson, I don't recall quite who it was, but basically it was to the effect of, In Europe, there is no question of whether to vote for a communist and have something to eat, and to vote for the other guy and to starve. And that was kind of the dilemma in Western Europe at the time. There were so many people that were in poverty, and because the economy in Western Europe had not recovered yet from the war, that communism was looking pretty good to a lot of people. So the CIA had a big, just doled out money to all of the conservative or at least anti-communist candidates they could find. And they helped them with their political campaigns, and they even, the U.S. government got involved and encouraged Italian Americans to write their relatives back home to encourage them not to vote for communists. And that was actually very effective. It's one thing when a government or a political party says, communists are evil, blah, 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 don't vote for them. Yeah, that's compelling for some people, but probably not the broader population. But when you start hearing from family who you trust that such and such is not a good person or political party to vote for, that generally has a lot more impact, relatively speaking. So that was a big win there, and the conservatives were able to win that election, much to the disappointment of communists. And yeah, that was pretty pure, clear-cut election interference. The United States did something similar in Japan as well. In the post-war period, a lot of conservative political parties were not really playing well together. They were all competing pretty hard, and they didn't really have a single movement that they could kind of congeal behind and act as a sort of relevant, suitable counterforce to the left. And so the CIA came in and basically them, kind of paid off whoever needed to be paid off to try to get them all into one coalition that could actually win. Those are clear-cut examples of election interference, and again, specifically election interference, not necessarily supporting a general in a coup or some such. But today, in the post-Cold War period, accusations of interference in elections is more subtle, and generally it comes in the form of accusing NGOs of, engaging in sundry activist-type activities, undermining such and such political group. A lot of it is politically motivated. That's another kind of theme you see. A lot of countries in the world, and there's a lot now, Russia, China, India, even countries that have democracies like India complain about it. They define interference in their elections as NGOs just kind of being there. Greenpeace got on India's government's shit list for a while after they opposed this big land procurement thing. Basically, procuring land in India is just wicked difficult because nobody wants to piss off peasants, and so the laws are written in a way that's very favorable to landowners, specifically, small landowners in rural areas. So if you want to, say, invest in a big factory or a big project or some such, buying the land can be very, very time-consuming and very expensive. And so, the Indian government was really excited about this one project. I think it was the Nano Factory project that was being set up in West Bengal. The Nano was like this little car that an Indian company was trying to roll out as a cheap alternative for the poorest segment of the market. People who may not even be able to traditionally afford cars at all might be able to afford a Nano. So they were going to build this factory, and then Greenpeace came in with some of their people, and there was something, land, something endangered, this, that, or the other. Whatever it was, the project ended up getting scuppered. And so the Indian government kind of cracked down after that and basically kicked them out, effectively. Now that's not an election, but that's an example of an NGO operating in the country, influencing the nation's politics. And, economic developments like that are very political in India, because generally you have to have some kind of political patronage there, some connections, to make something like that work efficiently. Excuse me. So countries around the world are very negative on American NGOs, right? And that's cited as election interference, especially democratization NGOs, which are kind of singled out specifically as agents of the West, if not the United States specifically, trying to overthrow governments and this kind of thing. The Russians in particular love this. They always complain about color revolutions being sort of the masterminded and by the CIA or Washington or whatever. And for them, democratization NGOs are sort of vanguard of American, malign intent in the world. Those are the organizations through which the United States tries to manipulate events in other countries. So for them, it's a matter of national security to ban American NGOs and prevent them from operating. So that's how they're defining election interference, and that's not too far off from what the Russians probably did in the United States. Now, granted, again, whether American democratization NGOs are evil entities, malign entities, agents of the United States, or if they're good-natured activists, or whatever you want to think of them, that's subjective. I'm not going to fight your battles for you. You can think about that what you want. But the question is what the Russians did in the U.S. election in 2016 all that different? And probably not. I mean, they probably didn't use tactics that are that different from any other activist group, which is to kind of go out into space, into social space, in this case online, and try to spread your message through one way or the other. Ideally, an NGO, a well-run NGO, an ethical NGO, would not be underhanded, would not put out propaganda. Rather, ideally they would try to put out truth, something that's based on truth anyway, as opposed to just a purely, malintent, a pure propaganda campaign intended to try to undermine the legitimacy of the overall system. It's a difference in goals, basically. Democratization NGOs want better governance, whereas the Russians stand accused of propagating a campaign that was purely negative in its goal. Just undermine legitimacy and try to make people think that the whole system is rigged, that kind of thing. So there's a difference there. That's the key difference in that regard, as far as election interference goes, at least in the modern era. Yes, it's true that the United States has interfered in other countries' affairs, but not so much in their elections that much. I was going to go somewhere else with that, and slipped my mind again.
Meandering, we're good at that.
Yeah, hopefully I'll be better next week. Kind of work on my schedule. I should be a little more awake next time.
Do you do coffee? I don't think you do, if I remember correctly.
Oh God, no. Makes me sick. The caffeine makes me sick. Kukio poisoned me one time doing that.
Oh no.
He says, hey, he always had tea, he always had, like, oh yeah, I got this Japanese imported thing, tea. And so he came to me one day and he said, hey, here, have some tea. You want to try it? And I was like, yeah, sure, He always introducing me to new cool things, so I thought, yeah, sure. Then I try it, and pretty good, and I was like, yeah, I'll take another one, why not? And then after a while, I start feeling that familiar buzz. And then I thought, oh, shit. I kind of go up to him. That didn't have caffeine in it, did it? He's like, oh, yeah. And I'm like, oh.
It's a trap!
So I was up for the next 24 hours. I could not go to sleep, and I was just sick the whole time. Just, stomach pains and, headaches, and yeah, it was not fun. So no, I'm not a coffee person, unless it's decaf, and even then it's mostly cream and sugar. So where was I? Oh, a quibble, a minor quibble. The United States does not constantly interfere with others' elections, unless you agree with the notion that NGOs are vanguard of CIA or Washington, and that participating in politics in other countries on behalf of those NGOs constitutes election interference. If you think that, then yes, constantly interfering in elections, but if you set the bar higher, if you think interfering in an election requires more clandestine behavior, more purposeful behavior, then probably not. I don't think the United States has much interest in that. And a lot of countries that we would probably like to interfere in the elections of don't really have elections to interfere in. China and Russia don't really have a particularly meaningful election. Russia has more meaningful elections than China, but yeah, there's still not a lot of point. The outcome is not really in doubt. Let's see. To what degree do you think student loans will pose widespread economic danger? Do you expect that the changing job market will put many universities out of business? Widespread danger. Probably not. One of the problems with the financial crisis in 2008 was derivatives. We talked a little bit about this, I think, last time. And this is actually a point I forgot to mention. We talked last time about how sort of the fact that investors were not paying attention to the quality of the mortgages that they were buying in these securitized mortgage packages. The fact that they weren't paying attention created a moral hazard wherein mortgage companies would just give mortgages to anybody and then sell them off. And then the investors would buy them. And so, if you're a mortgage company, that makes a lot of sense. You're just getting free money, basically. So you just pump out the free money as much as you can. I didn't really explain why the investors were doing that so well. I think I said something like they were making money, so they didn't care. Well, part of the reason that they did that was derivatives. And derivatives are a financial instrument in which you can basically sort of make a bet, kind of. It's almost like an option, in which you make an agreement with some other party in which they agree to give you some amount of money if a certain other financial thing, like a stock or a bond or a collateralized debt obligation, as the case may be, if it behaves in a certain way, if the price goes up a certain amount, then the other party has to sell it at a certain price, probably below that price. And that's basically what an option is. But the thing that distinguishes derivatives from options is that derivatives can be a lot more complex. You can do all kinds of weird shit with them. And so derivatives had kind of taken off, I think, in the 90s. That financial sector really started exploding in terms of innovation. And that had been facilitated by, computer technology, more sophisticated, innovations in the financial industry itself. A lot of deregulation, a lot of different things kind of came together to create a more dynamic financial sector. And derivatives were kind of emerged from that, were a part of that. I think they'd already been around, but they really took off in that sort of late 90s period. And again, if I'm talking out of my ass, not getting this wrong, and somebody in chat knows better, please put it in chat, because I want to know most of all if I'm wrong. But what derivatives can be used to do is to hedge risk. If you're taking on a lot of risky assets, you can buy derivatives and kind of hedge that risk, and so make it so that you wouldn't lose as much money as you might otherwise without the derivative. And so what that means is that you can take on even more risk, because you're covered. You have these derivatives in place that kind of give you some protection. And so that's kind of what that's why student loan debt won't be as bad, because not because of derivatives, but because the problem with derivatives, which is that they don't protect you from systematic risk, which is what really kind of led to the 2008 financial crisis. People learned from that derivatives are not like a cure-all. And so because of that, financial institutions and other investing, institutional investors, so to speak, that's why they haven't loaded up, so to speak, on as much student loan debt. So there's not as much systematic risk, so I don't think it's as much of a big problem. If like everybody and their mother, like 90% of people with student loans all decided to stop paying at once, yeah, that could be a problem, but I don't think there's like a bubble, so to speak, in student debt. At least not in any form that would present a threat to the health of the overall financial system. I welcome input on this point again from chat. Anybody who has something to add there, feel free. I might be missing something. I'm not in the best mental condition.
That was
let's
me
see.
last week.
Oh, just tired.
Yeah, sometimes being a fleshy meat bag of a human creature, raised primate, whatever you want to call us, sometimes the body just doesn't do what you want it to do. And you have the essence of, like, it would be great if I could just function perfectly right now, but it doesn't always happen. And you have a sleep reason for it. You're just deprived of rest. But I had a week where I was just kind of off, and I didn't have a super obvious explanation other than that I'm a mortal being that doesn't always work correctly.
Yeah, it gets worse when you get older.
Yeah.
I remember I used to be able to kind of force myself to stay up and do work and, you know, whatever it is I needed to do. And there just came a point when I just literally could not do it. Like I would kind of sit down and, all right, I'm going to really get this done, and I would just fall asleep in my chair. That had not been a problem before, but yeah, once you reach a certain age, your body is just like, no, we're not doing this.
Powering down.
Yep, you're done. Sorry. Let's see. There was a second part to that question. Do you expect that the changing job market will put many universities out of business? Probably not. I mean, if there ever came a point where universities really started to lose business because of changes in the job market, they would probably respond accordingly in a way that would make them attractive again. You know, universities are, they have free agency, so they can react to changes like that. So I don't think they would be put out of business, so to speak. They would just, the nature of universities would then change. And probably will change. I don't know how. You know, how society broadly, including universities, should change and adjust in response to structural changes in the economy is the multi-trillion-dollar question. You know, that's the question of our age, the challenge of our epoch. You know, how do we deal with this torrent of change that's kind of descending upon us? And you know, if you've got some answers to that, feel free to let the world know so we can kind of get past this era of discontent and unrest. You know, the sooner we find an answer to that kind of question, the better off everything will be. But for now, we don't have one, and I personally don't have any answer to that. So I don't know what change that should take, what form that kind of change should take. But in general, to kind of metagame it, I would imagine universities would still be relevant just because they would adjust to it. They would respond somehow to it. Let's see. I'm independent but liberal, but do you think the violent suppression of free speech by the left Antifa is a greater threat to the structural integrity to the U.S. than classic right-wing religious ignorance and denial of science? I don't think it's greater. I think it's all bad news. You know, none of it is really a great development. It's not exactly a shining moment for American political discourse when you have something like Charlottesville or some other such equivalent. So I don't think it's a greater threat. I think it's just a part of a broader trend, a broader decay in the political culture that's kind of been ongoing for the past 30 years. And this is just the latest symptom, the latest manifestation of that decay. And I think it would be better to kind of double down on kind of informing people what American political culture is, you know, what the precepts it's built on, the institutions that it depends on and how they work. You know, some proper instruction in what liberalism is, what liberal society is, and how it functions, I think is in order. But and again, for the American listeners, this is add this disclaimer almost every time I use the word liberal. When I say liberal, I mean what in the United States passes as classical liberalism. That's sort of old school proper liberalism that forms the bedrock of every Western society, or westernized society, as the case may be. So shoring up liberal institutions and the public's understanding of liberalism, I think, would help. But you know, I'm sure it's much more the problem itself is much more complicated than any one solution could solve. You would probably need a multifaceted approach to deal with something like that. You know, culture is a very tricky thing. I think we talked about it a little bit last time. It's very amorphous and squishy and abstract. It's hard to pin down. So when you see something that's a negative trend in culture, specifically political culture in this case, it can be very hard to fully understand the problem, let alone come up with something that addresses it and reverses it. Let's see. Have you heard of the underground rise of Christianity in China? If so, why do you think it's happening? I'm so glad this person asked this question because I've had something in my notes relating to this for like a month and a half, and I've never been able to get to it.
Nice.
So now is this talking point's time to shine. If I can find it in my notes. Somewhere lost in the forest.
I've watched a documentary or two on the subject in general, the underground churches and stuff. I don't think it's super new. Maybe something new has changed about it, but Christianity as a set of ideas is pretty adaptable to the human mind. So if the idea is presented somewhere where it's not present, then some people are gonna get on the train, so to speak, because it promises a lot of things that are pretty exciting for people, like eternal life, for example, forgiveness for all of your wrongdoing. Like, those are some pretty exciting concepts, and Christianity promises those to you. So we talk about the norms of different countries, and China is different from a lot of the West in that they have spiritualism, but it's not like worshiping a single all-powerful God in the way that Abrahamic faiths do, which is Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, where there's a God, maybe there's a Son, a Holy Spirit, or a prophet or something, but it's usually kind of condensed as a singular entity that has all the power in the universe and that sort of thing. So I would guess that it's just kind of missionaries have been trying to go to China and spread Christianity since China was discovered by the West. So this is just kind of the propagation, the survival, and the continuation of that legacy and those ideas there. You can think about ideas, like sets of ideas, almost like they're conditions that people have that are contagious. So if someone has an idea set they're very excited about, they want to share it with other people and say, hey, this is the cat's pajamas, like you should check out this cool idea. So they'll get on the train and then the idea spreads and so forth. And it's kind of the push and pull between how fast can the idea set spread in the region against the currents of the norms and also the regime, like the government of China and their stance on Christianity.
Yeah, China the Chinese government has a weird relationship with Christianity. So Christianity is associated with Western imperialism, specifically missionaries, such that they became targets during China's revolutionary period in the early 20th century. And they cracked down on Christianity pretty hard over the course of 40s, 50s. Mostly the communists did, more so than the Kuomintang. Chiang Kai-shek actually converted to Christianity, the head of the Kuomintang in the 1930s. He converted to Christianity in order to try to get more support, in order to build his image in the West, to get more support against the Japanese, among other rivals. He did this way back in, like, I think the 1920s, something around there, and this is when he married that relative of Sun Yat-sen. And yeah, the idea was just to get broader international support. So Christianity has roots there. But the government isn't really comfortable. The Communist Party of China is not comfortable with them because they're not comfortable with anything they don't directly control. So they do allow Christianity. They have kind of, taken a more conciliatory stance as far as allowing religion, not just Christianity, but others as well. But it all has to be state sort of run or overseen. The churches are all have people appointed by government, or at least approved by government. The church hierarchy, rather, and all of the people who work within it all have to be approved by government. And so that whole hierarchy has to have government oversight. You can't just go out and kind of set up your own church. That would be considered illegal. It still happens, those are the underground churches, but the government doesn't approve of it. So yeah, Christianity never went away after the communists won the Civil War. Kind of been operating in the background, in the underground of China, ever since. And when the country opened up a bit in the 1980s, roughly, then they kind of were able to start proselytizing again and kind of spreading the message. And I think since then, the answer to the question of why it's taken off so much, religion in general, not just Christianity, has taken off in China over the past 20, 30 years. It's not an exclusively Christian phenomena. And as to why religion in general has become popular, and understand when I say religion, I don't just mean monotheistic religions like Christianity and Islam. I also include in that other like Taoism, Buddhism, etc. All of these have been gaining followers in China at a pretty good pace. And a part of the reason is the pace of economic development has created a lot of uncertainty. It used to be that you had your iron rice bowl, that you had your job security, the government assigned you a job, you had a place to live, everything was pretty taken care of. But in the free market economy that was implemented after the reform period in the 1980s, there was a lot of uncertainty. A lot of the things that used to be pretty secure suddenly were not, and people became very anxious, and they didn't know what would happen to them. And so those are the kinds of people who find religion attractive. It kind of gives you some answers, comfort, etc. And so part of the reason religion has been taking off is just because of the economy taking off. The two kind of go together in a sense. And also part of it is people kind of becoming tired of the cutthroat nature of Chinese society. If you talk to Chinese, they're kind of that civil society, or more, well, not civil society, but the civility of society. There's not a lot, they don't perceive there to be a lot of civility in China. And some of the most vicious critics of Chinese culture and Chinese people are actually Chinese themselves. They're quite happy to point out how little they trust their countrymen. That's not universal, but I've heard that enough times. And it's not that they hate their country or just don't trust anybody, but there's just a sense that you have to be careful. It's kind of not everybody is very. Some people will kind of be out to get you, so you have to be wary. So in that sense, Christianity kind of offers something there as well. It offers to kind of improve society, to improve the people, kind of give some ground, some reason, some impetus for self-improvement that would not be there otherwise, that is attractive because of the coarseness of the broader public. So that's my quick and dirty answer to that. I might be able to add more if I weren't so brain dead. But to this other point I had in my notes, this is a story that kind of colors this discussion. In June, there was some Chinese in Quetta maybe, in Pakistan, sort of a frontier city. And they were there on business visas. And what happened, they were working at a language school run by some South Korean guy. And so all of this is fairly innocuous, that's not unusual. But what happened is they all got killed, and everybody was wondering why. And it may have been because they were secretly proselytizing. Which is a pretty ballsy thing to do in a country like Pakistan, given its track record as far as things like blasphemy and other such issues. But apparently, supposedly, they were secretly proselytizing Christianity in the village that they're working in, around the language school. And somebody found out about it and didn't like it and went after them. So this was super awkward for both Pakistan's government and the Chinese government. Because nominally these are very tight allies. For anybody who doesn't know, Pakistan and China have a long-running alliance. Not an official on-paper treaty alliance, but very good relations that go back several decades. And neither of them really wanted to deal with this. From Pakistan's perspective, Pakistan wants Chinese investment and wants to cultivate them as all-weather allies, unlike the United States, which is kind of a very inconsistent ally, has been over the past 50-some years. Sometimes it's a really great friend, and sometimes not so much, kind of the opposite sometimes. But China is always there. They're an all-weather ally, and Pakistan really wants to have that relationship, if for no other reason than to kind of act as a counterbalance to American pressure, if not international pressure generally. But having Chinese citizens being murdered in Pakistan kind of undermines that, kind of makes it a little harder. So it was very embarrassing for Islamabad on that count. For the Chinese government, it was embarrassing because they like to think that they have their religious population under some degree of control. They don't want Christianity and other religions kind of going out, well, even within China, they don't want them operating too openly and freely. but they certainly don't want them going into other countries and causing problems. You know, China's foreign policy is very much to kind of play things low key, although that might change going forward. But up till now, it's been to play things low key and to try not to cause any issues in partner nations. So if Chinese Christians go overseas and start proselytizing in places where proselytizing Christianity is going to be a problem, like in Pakistan, for example, that creates a dilemma for the Chinese government, because they already do quite a bit to try to keep the religious population in line. But ultimately, you know, you can't control everybody. There's 1 billion plus people in China, and if some of them want to go overseas to proselytize, there's not a whole lot you can do to stop them. So this presents that problem for the Chinese government in terms of diplomacy and diplomatic relations as well, not just in Pakistan but elsewhere. And this kind of just speaks to the globalization of China. You know, the incremental expansion of outside influences on China and its culture, and then in turn the impact that China has on other countries. You know, people aren't used to thinking of China as being like a big problem. To a degree, it varies from place to place, but you know, as Chinese get more wealth, as the individual Chinese citizens gain more wealth, they'll have more power to influence the rest of the world. And that could come to be an issue on an individual level. Even if the Chinese government doesn't want people to go overseas and do things like this, they may not be able to stop them. So then it has the option of cracking down harder at home, which could create problems, political instability, which the Communist Party of China definitely does not want. Or they can let them go free. They can just kind of say, all right, you can have some space in which to do this, but then that creates instability overseas and international, and that's in a risk-averse political culture. That's also unacceptable. So, what Beijing does in response to this kind of problem, to Christianity in China, as well as to how its citizens behave outside of China, especially in terms of sensitive political issues like religion, that's going to say a lot about China's role and how effective they are at projecting their power and influence. Let's see. Tifa, China. Cities, particularly large cities, are experiencing dramatic growth compared to rural areas. Proximity effects, networking, convenient access to skilled workers, etc., are often cited as the reason. Since this trend shows no signs of reversing, it seems probable that either housing/zoning rules or state national economic policy will need to adjust. What kind of adjustments would you predict? I don't know, because well, here's the thing. In the United States, we don't really have state national economic policies. You know, to give you a particularly extreme example of that, the city of Houston, which is the 4th, I think, largest city in the United States, has no zoning laws. They don't zone, so you can totally just build your huge smog factory right next to a little residential suburban cul-de-sac, and that would be pretty legal. You can totally do that. So when you talk about economic policy, national economic policy, that's, well, especially in the United States, where we don't really have national level economic policy at all, that's a little bit of a weird concept here. But not every country runs things like the United States, so it's probably more relevant in other areas. Nigeria, for example, has a huge problem, Lagos, which is a big super city that is just exploding in population much faster than the city can handle it. So how do you deal with super cities, these sort of mega-sized metropolises, whichever it is? How do you deal with that? So, let me think about it. Well, I mean, the first thought that comes to mind is just sheer infrastructure. You're going to need a lot more. You're going to have to manage your fresh water better. You're going to have to build and maintain more roads. You're going to have to worry about affordable housing. Some cities more than others. And these might not sound like big problems. Like, these aren't problems in Dallas, where I live, because Dallas is on a big flat area, so there's lots of land to expand to. We have lots of reservoirs that we built over the past half century, so there's no shortage of water. So everything is kind of gravy for us. But some cities don't have access to a lot of water, including particularly the large cities. And even large cities that do have access to a lot of fresh water may outstrip that supply. They might well have to worry quite a bit about where they're going to get fresh water. In terms of something like road maintenance, if you already have a lot of congestion in your traffic system, building a lot of roads is going to be a necessity. But how you do it is also going to be important. If you have all of your economic activity centered in one part of your city, building more roads won't necessarily help because everybody's still going to be driving into that one part of the city. You're going to have to try to diversify spatially the distribution of economic activity in your city such that traffic does not concentrate quite that much. I'm sure anybody who has experience and a background in local development is getting a good laugh out of this because I have virtually no background in that. Unless you want to count many hours in Sim City, which I don't think would really be considered legitimate experience. But yeah, just basic infrastructure would be the big thing, and managing that better. Going forward, that's going to be a bigger and bigger challenges as cities get to be, massive, 20 million population, 30 million population, etc. Yeah, economic policy is a weird animal. I was reading an article, I think today, about that. There was some town in Oregon that had been a factory town. They had been like a wood mill town. And then that just died, basically, in the 80s or 90s, when some new regulations about wood or forestry or some such were passed. And the town had been dependent on the mill, and it closed. So they were in, deep trouble. But then recently, Facebook came and offered to build a farm there, a server farm, and they were pretty excited about that. And so they won the deal, so to speak, in so much as a city can win a deal like that. They got the server farm, and that's kind of become the new economic driver in the city. But the degree to which the city itself, the degree to which economic policy determined that is debatable. I mean, if you're Facebook, you want to get the best deal you can, so you're interested in tax incentives and things like that. But really, the decision should just be based on what's the best place for it. By tapping these sort of government incentive, by asking for them, you create competition between cities, and so you would just end up creating a kind of downward spiral where cities are basically paying you tax money from other industries to come and settle down there. That's a mixed bag in terms of economic impact. It's probably not a good idea to do if you're a city. But, if you're desperate for work, if you're desperate for a new economic driver, that's the kind of thing you kind of have to do, because otherwise, what else is there? If you're a mill town and the mill dies, well, the logical thing to do is to just downsize. The city should die, or at least get a lot smaller, until it reaches a kind of new equilibrium. There's no reason that cities have to maintain the same size they are. There's no rule that says factory towns have to stay prosperous forever. At some point, the thing that made the place a city is going to go, and at that point, you just have to shrink. That's basically what happened to downtown Detroit. There's no reason to be in downtown Detroit unless you're some gentrifier of some sort or another, which is more prospective, land prospecting more than anything. I'm getting off topic. Yeah, I mean, economic policy, it's not as important as you might think it would be, and some of it is just some of it is a net negative in terms of economic impact. I wouldn't necessarily recommend cities and countries even engage in too much of it. This is an old debate in economics. To what degree should you have an industrial policy? Some countries have very large, effective industrial policies. The United States has virtually none. Some countries have very large, ineffective industrial policies. And some have very sort of minor, middling industrial policies. Which is the right path to go down is subject to debate. You could kind of go round and around on that. But I don't know that there's any one policy or set of policy changes that would result from the emergence of megacities that I could point to. Just the only thing I can think of is the obvious, which is better shepherding and managing of resources. You know, things like water or space, you know, in terms of transportation infrastructure, you know, things like that. But I don't have any deeper insight to offer there. My apologies. How do I know Neuro? How long have you, please? How long have I known you?
I would guess around 7 years, because we knew each other at UTD.
Yeah.
So it's been around that long, and I would say we've probably lived under the same roof for at least a year and a half, probably closer to 2 years.
Did we? Was it that long?
Yeah.
Huh. I thought it was like 6 months.
No. Well, there was also time in Vancouver as well.
Oh, yeah, it was just a couple days though.
I'm pretty sure it was around a year. There may have been some points where you like left and came back and stuff, but
Oh, I definitely was only there for a couple. I came like once.
no, I mean in Carrollton.
Oh, in Carrollton. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, I visited a lot in Carrollton.
Yeah.
But there was that, yeah, I thought the period when I was actually in the apartment was only 6 months. But I guess I was wrong.
Yeah,
I don't remember, honestly. I'm losing time in my old age. But there you go, 7 years thereabouts. How do you think our American culture work out the growing divide between LGBT communities and spiritual communities in America? It probably won't. That's kind of the short answer. It's anybody's guess, because that's a long-term thing. You know, that's something that'll work out over the long term, and God knows what happens in the long term. As John Bernard Keynes said, we're all dead in the long term. So, who knows? Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, there could be some kind of consensus, some kind of peace, acceptance over the long run, and then maybe attention to something else. But on the other hand, you know, history is not linear. It's not as though things always change in one direction. I mean, even notions of progress itself change from epoch to epoch. So what we think of as progress now may not be thought of as progress in the future. So it could well be that there will be a retrenchment of current division. It may even get worse. I mean, it could go any which way. I think an overarching question is it important whether or not there's a healing, whether there's a rapprochement there between the two groups, or if things get worse. And I don't know that it really is. You know, social issues like that are kind of, you know, the opiate of the masses, so to speak. You know, social issues are a big distraction in politics that distract from bigger issues. If you want to talk about something tangible like civil rights for certain groups, that's one thing. But, you know, in terms of, you know, who's going to win, you know, we have conservative social values enshrined in law, or will we have these progressive? That's going to change with time. It's just going to go back and forth. One group will get the upper hand in one decade, the other group will get it the other. It's just going to keep going, unless there is some kind of eventual acceptance and rapprochement. But whatever the outcome is, it's not going to be lasting, probably. Or it will be gone, or it will be just dealt with, and it won't be an issue anymore. I think, you know, when you live in an era of structural economic change that's creating convulsions in society, you know, those tend to be the more important issues. So whatever happens with regard to social issues, that'll be sort of amorphous and change with time. So it's not, basically what I'm saying is this isn't like the most important issue, at least for me. in terms of the broader scope of things. So I don't really see a lot of relevance to what happens to the political culture, for example, which is a big overarching question. Yeah, I wish I could be more cogent on something that weighty and important, but I'm not. The words just aren't coming.
One thing that I would kind of argue against the premise of the question is that there's an increased divide between gay and lesbian and bisexual kind of individuals who are out versus in decades past. Because if we're thinking week to week, year to year, sometimes it can seem like there's a spike in the division between, say, the LGBT demographic and people who are not LGBT. Whereas if you're taking a decade by decade or century by century, it's very clear which direction the progress is moving in. So it's good to take the long view. I know they're, like you're saying, it's the opiate of the masses. It's what people want to talk about, and it seems like there's new and exciting changes and stuff all the time, and it's going back and forth and back and forth. But if the scale is zoomed out a few notches, it becomes pretty obvious which way things are going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is a broad trend towards more acceptance in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
But, 20 years from now, if there is acceptance by modern standards, there'll probably be something new invented to bitch about.
Well, we're good at concerning ourselves with things and getting upset about stuff. I think that's something that really speaks to how the human brain is wired. We just have so much hardware that's for processing stress and upsettedness and being butthurt about stuff. So we're pretty much always going to be upset about stuff.
Yeah.
There's going to be something else.
So there probably will be some kind of something that shrinks the divide between LGBT communities and spiritual communities. But that divide will probably manifest again later as some new form of division, I would guess. So it's going to still be there, it'll just be defined differently.
Mm-hmm.
As the old saying goes here in America, the more things change, the more they stay the same. How do you think? Maybe don't really the subject. Yeah, so my minor thoughts on the subject. Very minor, especially at this point. How would you explain the decline of religious activity in the States, or rather, what factors do you think contribute to the decline of religious activity and identification? What are the ramifications of the decline if it continues? Oh boy. If I had not failed to get my dissertation, or to make a dissertation, as the case was, when I was in the PhD program I was in, addressing this question probably would have been what I would have done. That was actually what I was working on when shit hit the fan. That's another story for another time. But yeah, when I went down, before I went down the rabbit hole, I was working on a dissertation about how culture changes with urbanization, or at least that's the direction I was going. And yeah, urbanization and modernization, which the two generally go together, is immensely destructive in terms of culture, in terms of norms. It tends to break down, it tends to atomize. Atomization is sort of the, when you live in a rural area, you probably live near your family, and you probably have a relatively large family. So you've got a big support network, and they're all kind of around. What happens with urbanization is that generally people lose touch, or at least have weaker relations with the rest of their family. And they tend to have just their one family in their one house, and they're kind of self-sufficient. And on the one hand, that brings a lot more freedom, a lot more independence, such that you're not as dependent on help from your friends and family. But it also means you're much more isolated, which means you're at more risk, which creates more anxiety. So, among the changes is that religion tends to become less important because you're kind of living generally a more comfortable life. You generally know where your next meal is coming from. So it's kind of like the opposite of China. You know, in China, there's all this churn now because of the economic reforms. That's creating a lot of anxiety. But as things kind of settle down and, you know, there's more modernization, there's less need for tools, social institutions with which to manage uncertainty and anxiety. And so in that way, it kind of breaks down. Also, religion needs, to a degree, maybe more monotheistic religions, but religion needs a certain amount of community to really be effective. One of the really good things about religion is that it brings people together and creates networks in which people can support each other when things get tough. That's a really useful social institution. But when you're in a city, you tend to be cut off from people you know. You don't know the people around you. They're all strangers. Everything is very alien and kind of, you know, it's not built in a way that's conducive to socializing, to building communities, especially if you live in a suburb. You know, in that case, urbanization tends to just separate people and divide them and break down those kinds of social institutions that require community in order to be really effective. And so in that sense, in that way, and that other way, urbanization breaks down religious institutions. So that's it in a nutshell. It's really just modernization and urbanization combined, and the atomizing, alienating lifestyle that it induces in people. Again, it's a trade-off. It's not all that. You know, you get more freedom. You know, if you live in a society where social norms are very restrictive or are very, you know, oppressive even, being able to move to the city and make it on your own could be very liberating. You could be freed from the shackles of whatever norms and rules are in place where you came from. So in that sense, in that sense, a positive. But then the downside is that you don't have that support network there. It's not as strong. You don't know the people around you as much. There's not as much community. You know, you give up something to get that liberation. Now, mind you, I never actually did that dissertation, so I'm not an expert. I've read a bit about it, is what I'm saying. And it's a particularly interesting subject, but I'm not like any kind of expert by any stretch of the imagination. So I'll add this disclaimer here. I try to add it every week. I'm not an expert in most of the shit I talk about. Most of the stuff I talk about just comes from stuff I've read, news articles, maybe the odd report here and there, think tank, what have you. Something I've watched, etc. So I'm not speaking gospel truth. I'm just sharing information, and you can make of it what you will. I hope that it's the information I give is useful and interesting to people. You know, if not, feel free to say so. So maybe I can improve on that point. But yeah, I'm just throwing this out there for the benefit of anyone who's interested.
Take of this what you will.
Oh, that was the last question.
We're caught up. Nice.
We caught up. We broke the question barrier. Are we? Do we have time?
Yeah, I think we have about. Well, depending on your energy level, because I know you were up super early. We could start, or we could go for another 40 minutes, or we could do 20 minutes, depending on how you're feeling.
Oh, all right. I can make it to the end for sure, because I've got to stay up for a thing I've got to do tomorrow night.
Bastion actually knows how to get a fucking big.
So I don't want to be. I want to try to stay up late tonight so that I can wake up later, so I won't get tired as early rather. So I can definitely make it. So 40 minutes, is that it?
40 minutes.
40 minutes, alright. You could probably make something work in that 40 minutes. A couple weeks ago, S&P downgraded China's debt. And that was, they cited the trajectory of the debt as being the issue, so than just, you know, the absolute level of debt. And, you know, the issue for them is, the issue of debt in China has to do with state-owned enterprises and local government. And what happened with local government is that they, you know, in order to get promoted within the Communist Party of China, you have to have a feather in your cap. You have to have done something that's, you know, useful, or impressive. Generally, that means inspiring or, through leadership, incurring some kind of economic growth in your assignment where you are. And a lot of localities kind of struggle to do that because, most localities don't have a lot going for them. So in order to generate growth in the form of GDP, a lot of localities would borrow money and then just build shit, investment project, infrastructure projects, whatever. And the result would be that the economy in the locality would grow on paper. It would look like it was growing because there's all this activity. But it wasn't really private sector activity. It wasn't just endogenous activity. It was just that the effect of loans operating. And that's not a long-term strategy. You can't just keep borrowing money to generate growth. But if you're a party guy and you just want to look good, you're only going to be there a few years, so you can totally just borrow money and spend it while you're there. Goose the GDP numbers for a while and then get promoted, and then it's somebody else's problem. So that cycle continued up until a few years ago, and local debt was becoming pretty big. It wasn't like backbreakingly big, but it was on a trajectory to become a big problem in the future. And so the government kind of changed course. There was this big program, this big campaign to shift emphasis away from GDP. GDP is not the end-all and be-all. Not everything is about GDP. Try to focus development on broader concepts, on well-being, on private sector development, etc. So they tried to move the goalposts, so to speak. They tried to shift localities and the party in general away from using GDP as the principal and main metric by which success should be measured. So local debt is a problem, but it's not as much of a problem. The bigger problem is state-owned enterprises, which are these big companies that operate in certain industries, and they're propped up by the government, or owned by the government, hence the name. And they borrow money left and right because they can't compete for shit. They're very inefficient. They cannot compete with private sector entities. But the government doesn't want to wind them down because they employ so many people, and laying them all off all at once would create instability in the political system. And if you're an authoritarian one-party state in such a system, the last thing you want is instability, because no matter what the instability is, it's going to look bad for you. It's your fault. You're the only authority. So the state-owned enterprises, in order to continue operating, have to borrow a shit ton of money. And that's becoming a big problem because everybody knows that being state-owned, if they go bankrupt, it's the government that's going to have to bail them out. So as they accrue more and more debt, the debt load on the government, in turn, also increases. So the issue is, will at some point the government not be able to do that? Will it just have so much debt that the state-owned enterprises collapse, or the government's finances buckle and maybe collapse themselves? Nobody knows for sure. Probably not. They've got a lot of money to work with over there, and they have pretty competent leadership. But there is a question, and when you have an opaque political system and a commercial, and a free market that also suffers from that lack of transparency in varying degrees, the combined effect is to induce uncertainty. And if you're a businessman, you don't want to deal with uncertainty. Like if you're going to invest in some place like another country, you want to know all the variables. You want to know what's going on, what's going to happen. You want to at least have some idea of what's going to happen, rather. If there's a lot of opacity, like there is in China, that's a big turnoff. That's basically a barrier to trade. You're not going to invest in there, or at least you're going to be very reticent to investing, shit like that. So on that count, there's a lot of uncertainty about the level of debt. Nobody really knows quite for sure how much there is in total, and how much the Chinese government might be hiding. Because it being, again, an authoritarian one-party state, you can just hide that. I think we've talked about it before, there's a long-running suspicion that the Chinese government manipulates the numbers about its economy's performance in order to make itself look good. And there's no way to prove or disprove that, because again, one-party state. There's no, third-party arbiter you can kind of send in to check the books. The party doesn't have to allow an arbiter to check its books. They put out the numbers and you take it or leave it. That's how it works there. Let's see, so some new questions. How should disenfranchised Western men respond to growing female independence due to socialization of taking and reproduction, e.g. Planned Parenthood and socialized education? How should it... Well, that's a subjective question. You know, how you respond to that very much depends on what your goals are and how you perceive the situation. Some people don't have a problem with it, they wouldn't want to do anything about it. Some people do have a problem with it, they do want to do something about it. I can't fight your battles for you, so I can't tell you what would be the best thing to do. Because, well, for one, I don't know what your preference is, which I would have to know in order to give you a recommendation. But more to the point, you know, it's a political question. It's a whatever you might want to do.
I don't think there's... I mean, with the premise of the question, I'm not sure what the disenfranchisement of men is. Like, how are
Well,
we...
there are men who think that women in society and women's preferences specifically are coming to become the dominant preferences in political decisions, as far as how you write rules, how you write company policies, etc. You know, for a rough example of that, a rough example off the top of my head, it used to be that in terms of dealing with male predation, male sexual predation, the impetus was on the female. It was the female's responsibility to avoid putting themselves in situations where it was easy for males to sexually predate on them. So if they did suffer from some kind of sexual assault, it must have been their fault for not exhibiting due diligence, so to speak, vis-a-vis male sexuality. So the shift that's been happening, that's kind of in process, is that the impetus is being shifted to the male. It's the male's responsibility to control their impulses such that they do not sexually predate. So which is right and which is wrong is subjective, whichever you want. You know, somebody is going to have the impetus on them. I guess you could have the impetus on nobody or on both, but that's getting into the weeds a bit. But the shift in question is, this shift is perceived by certain groups of men, and some of them don't like it. They see that as part of a broader trend that's disempowering men, or that's prejudiced against men, or discriminates against them. And they perceive that as a negative development generally, and you could ask, what would such a person do? What should such a person do, having that perception and wanting to take action to try to reverse it? We talked a little bit about culture earlier. Again, cultural norms are very hard to comprehend in the first place, and it's very hard to grasp trends and come up with ways to reverse them when you don't fully understand the concept to begin with. You know, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I'm any kind of expert on gender issues, because I'm not. And so I wouldn't know even where to begin with that. You know, I don't fully understand the trend itself, and I don't know how to reverse it, or how to propagate it, or whatever it is anybody would want to do. So it's a tough question.
That's a front where PactFacts has a lot more knowledge than both of us. She's been studying that for
many a year, so if she's around, you can ask if you have some gender studies related questions.
She's into other civil rights and social stuff as well. Like, I talk about Black Lives Matter and some of those other progressive movements on the stream some of the time, but I am, as is kind of apparent, a white male, so that's it's not like my home turf that I'm working from. It's something that I'm trying to delve into and understand.
Yeah, ditto. So PactFact is your go-to there. Let's see. I thought this was a separate question. It's actually part of the previous question. Specifically in the context of lesbian parenting and the total lack of need for men. I guess my answer would be the same. I don't know. I don't know. I still wouldn't know. Lesbian parenting, specifically lesbian parenting, I don't know anything about any trend there. I don't think there's ever going to be like a huge number of homosexual parents, because homosexuals as a proportion of the population are only like, what, 5% at most? It's not much. And most of those aren't going to be parents in the first place, so that's the subset of the homosexual community, or whatever it is I'm supposed to call them. LGBT, the subset of the LGBT community that's going to be parents is probably a pretty small fraction of the overall community. I would guess. I don't know, but that's my guess.
Well, the plus side is we have more of an issue of kids that are growing up not getting the care that they need. So if there are people who are not actively procreating but are parenting, that seems like a benefit to society rather than a detriment. Which, one thing that is a factor around the world is poor communities tend to have, or poor families tend to have more children, and they can't really provide great care if they're already poor, but children can do more work around the house or around a farm if you're in a rural community. So if you're having an LGBT community that's increasing in size and shouldering some of that burden of parenting, that seems like a benefit to kids getting more attention and care. That was just my guess, like reasoning through it, not really knowing any statistics on that type of stuff. But yeah, I think generally speaking, if we're taking into account like political correctness, homosexual is usually preferred below LGBT if you're talking about the demographic.
Below?
Yeah, homosexual is kind of offensive. People call people homos and stuff. It's not as nice, I guess, if you're trying to maximize the
I'm
sensitivity
showing my
to those
age.
groups. Yeah. Well, we come from an era, and I would guess a lot of the viewership is kind of in their mid-late 20s at this point, where the dialogue in gaming communities and stuff has changed over time to where, like, calling people gay was a really common thing you would hear on Xbox Live and in multiplayer PC games, whereas that's fallen off. Like, it used to even be in a lot of media. You can see this with a case study in Pure Ownage. They did a series of videos, and that was kind of one of their standard insults or whatever, and a lot of the imagery and stuff has changed a lot from their movie. They released a movie about 2 years ago, and their change over the course of those years reflects how the way that we throw around insults and words like that has also changed. But there are plenty of mean words, so it's not like we're running out anytime soon. Could just migrate over to a different insult.
I guess another perspective you could take with this question, maybe this person could elaborate a bit on what kind of direction they wanted me to go with this. But another perspective is, because women are more independent, they don't have to, and this kind of ties into the urbanization thing I talked about. Being more independent, you don't have to depend on someone else. So women are increasingly getting jobs in which they're secure enough in their means, in their finances, that they don't have to go and find a man, so to speak. They don't have to go and get married and kind of have that be their life. And that means that they can kind of raise kids by themselves if they want, if they are so inclined. And the way the laws are written are still kind of written for a society in which that's not the case. The legal system is very much geared towards married families, sort of the traditional atomic family. And the result of that is that there tends to be something of a bias against men in the... What is it? If there's like a divorce and they have to give custody, there's the word I want. In terms of giving custody of children, there tends to be a bias towards the mother in terms of who you give custody to. So in that sense, women increasingly don't need relationships, can have children without men, or at least in the sense that they don't have to keep men around. And the legal system hasn't quite caught up with that. So this question could be asking, how should men deal with that? And in that sense, you could make it a kind of civil rights issue, say that it's you could argue, someone who was so inclined of this perspective could argue that their civil rights, or at least their rights of some sort, were being infringed, and that current laws are discriminatory, and that an equitable outcome would be some kind of legislative that addresses such issues directly. Whatever specific examples they have of perceived discrimination, they could propose legislation that could address those issues. Again, not being particularly familiar with gender issues or with the pertinent laws in question, I can't really give any particular leadership, so I can't mount a white horse and lead your movement. I don't have those kinds of leadership skills, so I can't even really propose what the best first step would be, without being more familiar with the issue in question. So, kind of a meandering approach to answering this question. I'm sorry. I wish I had something more focused and direct. But
well, Packpack is here. Does she have the? I don't know if she saw the response and all. So Dorak is doing the question handing off and stuff, and normally we try to focus more on Agent Smith's area of expertise, which you could say has kind of a fuzzy outer barrier where if you don't know him super well, maybe even you as well don't know quite what you're really well versed in, what you're not versed in, and that sort of thing. So gender and social issues and stuff is an area where we're fairly ignorant. Try to learn about it, but that's not like your studied area of expertise. And I try to stay more as the background for most of these discussions, where I'm letting him have more of the floor and share his knowledge, as opposed to me having like a debate format or a host where I'm talking a lot and answering about half the questions. It's more like probably 90-10. If a religion one comes up, sometimes I'll chime in, or something related to brain science and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I'll try to add my 2 cents if I've read something about it, about a given topic, or if I can tie it into something I do know more. Sometimes I'll do that as well, but yeah, I'll generally try to answer a question even if I'm not familiar with it to some degree. Even if that's just me saying I don't know anything about it, but here's something kind of related to that. Yeah, certainly in those examples, your input is very appreciated. You can generally say a lot more, say something of a lot more substance than I can add in those cases. Let's see, there was a follow-up question to that. U.S. citizens seem increasingly factionalized and unwilling to tolerate other groups which disagree while being highly willing to dehumanize their political. How dire is the situation for democracy? Well, Americans have always been quite happy to dehumanize their political opponents. That's a long-running tradition, practically. So that's not really new. You know, factionalization, that's not new either. You know, American politics has always had something of a partisan streak. And in fact, if anything, the divisions were deeper in the early mid-1800s. You know, there was a civil war over those divisions. Clearly, they had something a bit deeper dividing them than anything we probably have now. But how dire is the situation? It could be dire in the long term if it just continues to deteriorate. Because again, the political culture is just it's not improving. It seems to be decaying to a degree. And I think part of that is ideology, almost. You know, sort of ideology has kind of become the new faith. You know, people believe certain things about the world and about how things work, how the economy works, how politics works, how society should work, how it should look, and a lot of that is kind of faith-based. You know, they don't. You can spend a whole career studying any one of those things and never come to a hard, good conclusion about what an optimal solution or policy would be. But there are people who pretend otherwise. There are ideologues who think that they have the answers and that they can just, that they understand the world and that they're going to go and proselytize and crusade, and you know, that kind of attitude is new. That's something that emerged since the 1960s, basically. Didn't used to be like that before the 60s. Politics was very mercenary. It was very realpolitik. It was very much based on tangible interests. You know, occasionally there would be sort of a moral panic or a social crusader type movement, but generally it was pretty hard-nosed stuff. It was pretty much, all right, you know, patron-client even in a lot of cases. It was very corrupt frequently. There were political machines that were predicated on corruption. But in the 60s it became much more idealistic. And at that point there were different factions that kind of emerged that had very different political preferences, very different notions of morality even. And once you get to big differences that go that deep, then you're going to have a lot of political problems. Because at least before there was a common frame of reference for what could be considered moral. But as that's changed, there are greater and greater and deeper divisions. It used to be if you disagreed on a policy, you could just say, oh, okay, we have a disagreement, so we'll compromise. But if your disagreement is over something that has to do with ethics or morality, compromise becomes more difficult, because it's difficult for people to compromise on something they deeply believe in. People who believe abortion is murder really believe it's murder. So it's very hard to compromise on something that's murder. They're killing babies, so how can we just say it's okay to kill a few babies or kill some kinds of babies at certain terms, things like that. So compromise in that case becomes difficult, because that's a very core issue. In cases like that, it would probably be a great idea to decentralize government so that the national government doesn't have to make such a decision, because invariably if you make a decision like that at the national level, you end up pissing off a huge chunk of the population, and then they proceed to spend the next however long, decades or generations trying to undermine the rule because they think it's immoral and wrong to begin with. Well, if you just let communities, ideally, individual communities, towns, cities, etc., decide for themselves something like that, then everybody kind of has what they want. It's not a great compromise, because then it's still happening somewhere. Again, to go back to the abortion example, abortion would still be happening somewhere, because there would be places that would allow it. But in their community, and communities that didn't want abortion, they wouldn't have it. So then at least they get something. That's a nice compromise to a degree. Not perfect, but it's a lot better than anything we're doing now. At the very least, people would stop bitching about it incessantly at the national level.
Yeah, it kind of feels more and more like sports, where politicians are finding the topics that aren't necessarily the greatest importance for the economy of the country and the governance, but more that push our emotional buttons and make us feel more. So rather than looking for points of compromise, they're looking for the hot topics that are getting people all riled up and basically pandering to their basest position, as opposed to looking for areas where we can benefit the most people possible, or help groups who need help, and try and make the investments that are going to improve the population in general. It's more of what can I say that's going to be really saucy and get a lot of attention for myself, so people will be talking about me moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, unfortunately, the game theory in Washington is such that it's better to be a drama queen and try to get attention than it is to actually do the hard work of talking and compromising and negotiating.
Mm-hmm.
And all that Mr. Smith goes to Washington type stuff. Actually, you could say one of the problems with Washington is that now there's too many Mr. Smiths in Washington. There's too many idealists who have a very particular idea of how they think it should. Maybe fewer Mr. Smiths and a little more corruption is in order.
Finding
Maybe
common ground isn't quite as exciting, I think, for the people who want something fancy to read in the political news. Oh, the candidate in my sector made a compromise with the opposing party. How weak they must have been. Their resolve, it's been flagging.
Well, to be fair, one of the overarching causes been, and this is a well we keep going back to. It's a well that I keep going back to. One of the overarching reasons pushing this decay is the structural changes in the economy and the subsequent broader social convulsions that have occurred on account of it. If we can get through that, if we can kind of get through this period, cross the river Styx, then we could reach a new equilibrium in which the economy and society stabilize. And as a result, the politics then I would hope anyway, I would hypothesize, would then stabilize as well. Because then there would be much less sense of despair, much looming doom, the sense that, the industry that I worked in for however long is going out of business and I don't know how to adjust to the new economy. I think a lot of that is powering that in part powers a lot of the discontent that's not just in the United States, but the broader world against status quo political institutions. If we can survive, if we can manage that, survive it, and get to the equilibrium at the other side, at the end of it, then I think things will start to improve. But the trouble is getting there, and certainly, at the very least, preventing a massive blow-up on the way to getting there. So let's see, the other big thing from the past week was the end of the Chinese Communist Party of China's big plenum. And, you know, we talked about this a couple weeks ago, and there was kind of it was an open question as to what Xi Jinping would do. It wasn't clear if he would go for the power play and try to entrench his control of the party and his rule, or if he would kind of continue the cultural, sort of informal political norms that had been established under Deng Xiaoping's tenure, and whether he would kind of not rock the boat too much. And he's rocking the boat. The results are in. And yeah, the plenum is over, and the Politburo has been announced, and it's all people loyal to him who are very old. And the reason that the age is significant is because normally, under the informal norm that had been established in the 1980s, at each plenum, a successor should be effectively announced, or at least made clear. And the successor invariably would be somebody younger. So there would always be at least one younger guy announced at the plenum to the Politburo, who was sort of the prince, so to speak. He would be the new guy who would take up control when the present leader retired at the end of his 10-year term. That didn't happen this time. There's no clear successor to Xi Jinping. There's no younger guy. They're all guys who are near the mandatory retirement age for the Communist Party of China. And so that's been interpreted as the power play. He's signaling that he's sticking around. He's not going anywhere, so he doesn't need a successor. And that forebodes, well, it's foreboding generally, really. Because at this point, nobody knows quite for sure what Xi Jinping wants to do with all this power. He seems to be a status quo conservative. That's the general impression thus far. You know, he doesn't want to stop economic reform, but he does want to entrench the Communist Party's political control of the country. And that's not a very ambitious policy. That's pretty much just, let's stick with the status quo, but with more security for us and the party. No shock there. But when you have as much power as he has, in an authoritarian system like China's, there's no telling what he could do. He could just decide he could do anything. You know, he has enough power now that if he wanted to institute a dramatic policy change, he could probably do it without too much trouble. So that introduces a great deal of uncertainty and unpredictability to China as far as the short to medium term goes in predicting policy there. And it also introduces uncertainty now at the global level, because China is a very powerful country, not just in its region, but globally, and what it does could have global ramifications. And some of the stuff Xi Jinping talked about in the plenum was a little disconcerting. One of the things he talked about was that China should take, quote-unquote, center stage in the world. You know, mind you, basically since the Communist Party won the Civil War in 1949, their whole foreign policy has been built around this idea of keeping quiet, you know, harboring their strength, trying to kind of hide it, build it up, but don't have it be too open. Make sure nobody knows too much about you, so everybody is constantly in and out, doesn't want to mess with you. And so, that being their strategy, they've always been very quiet. So now Xi Jinping has come out and said, let's not do that anymore. And if he actually does that, that would mean China would be much more active internationally. It would be much more proactive diplomatically in terms of issues like, say, North Korea or the Middle East or the South China Seas dispute. You know, there's all kinds of ways that an active Chinese diplomacy could take. And nobody knows what it would be, though. It's uncertain. So that could bode ill well, or potentially good, depending on how they use all that power they've been accruing. Xi Jinping also talked about building a strong military, quote-unquote, built to fight. That, of course, is ominous in its own right. I don't think I have to explain why that could be disconcerting. You know, a lot of countries in the region are already concerned about China's military power and its intentions. So, for Xi Jinping to come out and say we're going to build a bigger military, probably a blue water navy that can project force around the world, you know, that would be a big change in and of itself, and could shift the balance of power in global affairs. So maybe that Beijing, yeah. So there's also the censorship issue. You know, China, to a degree, has coerced actors of various sorts, sometimes governments, but more often institutions, usually companies or NGOs or what have you, tried to put pressure on them not to criticize the Communist Party of China, or to harbor people who do. Specifically people in China who leave the country as asylum seekers. So they haven't done that too much over the past couple decades, but it could be they could start ramping up the pressure even more to significant levels. And given how much power and influence China has, especially in countries, there's a real question about whether or not China could export its censorship regime. And that could force a lot of countries, including perhaps the United States, to make some hard decisions. It probably wouldn't be the United States government that would have to make it, it would be companies. You know, if you're a firm, maybe you have to cut support to some NGO or some community group, whatever, because they're not seen as being sufficiently towing the line as far as China is concerned about the Communist Party. So there could be problems there going forward. Again, all of this is very amorphous and uncertain. This is all just based off some limited, a speech that Xi Jinping made at the plenum. But it signaled, whatever form it ultimately takes, we know at least that there's going to be a big policy shift going forward. You know, even having the speech in the first place, talking about this stuff, was itself a big break from the past. And so, be on guard. Things are going to change. You know, China is going to be more active, and that could have big repercussions for people all over the world, depending on how they use the power they have. So that was a big historical event that nobody talked about because it was on the other side of the planet in a country that doesn't speak much English.
Mm-hmm.
Something to keep in mind.
I can't remember exactly which episode it was, but one of the earlier episodes on the YouTube channel of this Agent Smith time, we focused quite a bit on the rise of China, which is something that the US doesn't talk about that much. I think Trump and some other people just think of China as they're communists, they're kind of an old enemy, they're not messing with us right now, but we don't care what they're doing, kind of thing, as opposed to, on the global scale, the amount of growth that they've been having and the development of their country is making them a huge player moving forward, and the world should pay attention.
Yeah, China is going to have the largest economy in the world at some point in the next couple decades. And that, as the United States has shown, having kind of economic power translates to significant influence. And it's going to have an impact. It's going to have an impact on people's lives. And it behooves you to pay attention so that you can be prepared. And it may be that if you wait and don't do anything now to prepare, you're not in a position to resist or do something later, should you be so inclined. Yeah, significant changes in the world and the way the world is run and affairs, etc. They have a way of sneaking up on you. You wouldn't think they could. You would think something that was really momentous and significant would not be able to sneak up on you, that you would be able to see it coming. But for a lot of people, yeah, it just kind of comes out of the blue. Just the world changes one day, and it just doesn't seem to have any rhyme or reason. It just kind of happened. And for those people, it comes as a shock, and they often don't know what to do. So it really helps to pay attention and try to prepare to some degree, to at least be ready for some kind of change, even if you don't know what form the change will take. Be in a ready position. Be flexible. Have resources at hand. But that kind of forethought and planning ahead, it's not very popular. People like to deal with tangible problems of the present especially if you're in a democracy. Democracies have a bad habit of focusing too much on the short term at the expense of the long. The result being that we're, again, to call back to an earlier part of the conversation, that we're really bad at grand strategy. The United States, again, is a perfect example of that. All this power and no idea what the hell to do with any of it. Do I have time for one more?
Is there another question?
No,
We
we're done with questions. So we can quit if we're out of time.
Yeah, I think we're at a good stopping point.
All right.
Well, good having you on again.
Yeah,
Broad
it's good to
range
be back on.
of topics. Got to go around the world again. I know it had been about 2 weeks, so we're a little bit out of the rhythm. And then next weekend I'll be at BlizzCon Friday, Saturday. I'll get back on Sunday, but I don't think I'll be back in time to do this segment, so we may have a week off before we get back into the swing of it.
That's all good.
Yep, but always good having you on. Thank
Yep.
you, people, for your questions and engagement. And we'll see you next time.
Yep. See you next time.